So this second social studies lesson really is a continuation of the first social studies lesson, and it expands on that in that it allows students to move on from interpreting a timeline to actually creating a caption for a year and then creating a human timeline with their classmates. So to do this, I decided that my students would create the timeline for Derek Jeter's life, who is the person that they were focusing on for Black History Month. So because of this, I decided that my students would have to read from a passage and then highlight information based on their given year and create it and write it onto a caption sheet. However, I noticed that there were a lot of passages about Derek Jeter, but none really fit to a second grade reading level. Therefore, I decided to create my own that matched where my students were at reading-wise. So in finding this and creating this, I then handed a copy to each of my students, and then because it was still a little too difficult for everyone, I decided to read through it and show an example of how to find a specific year. So I read through the entire passage and then I gave myself a year. So let's say I was 1974. I would show myself physically highlighting that information. So it would be this. And then I also showed myself writing this down in my own words onto a caption sheet. We were really focusing on paraphrasing with this group of students because it is a really important digital citizenship skill, and it really was engraved into my students' minds that copying word for word is illegal. So they were actually very good at paraphrasing, which you will see in my students' examples. After I read it to them, students then went with a partner and read it on their own and worked on their own years. Each student got a year, and there were just enough years for every single student to create their own caption. At the very end of the lesson, the students used their captions to create a human timeline and had to get in order from the first year to the last. Friends, this is the caption sheet that my students used. So they wrote their year here and then wrote their information here, and then they were allowed to color it any way that they wanted and cut it out. So here is a student example. You will see that first they all wrote in pencil, and when I looked at it and made sure it was okay, they were allowed to go over it in a marker color that they wanted to make it darker. This was because after they created a human timeline, it was then hung up on a bulletin board for everyone to see. So this student's was 1998, and they wrote, Derek Jeter helped the Yankees win the World Series against the San Diego Padres. Student is one of my IEP students, and they were assigned 1999, and they wrote Derek Jeter and his team won the World Series against the Atlanta Braves. My next student had 2000, and they wrote Derek Jeter was the first person to win the All-Star Game MVP and the World Series MVP in the same year. 2009, Derek Jeter helped to win the World Series. It was his 5th time. 2014, Derek Jeter played his very last game in baseball. See, the student added a little respect down here because we've been watching videos of Derek Jeter as well. So you'll see that my students really were able to master the concept of captions, and it was really interesting at the end to watch them put themselves in order without any teacher guidance and create a human timeline. They then were able to read each of them out loud, and then they helped me hang them up. Up here, you'll see there's brown, and that's because I did create a humongous bat to put on our bulletin board, so it looked like the bat was hitting all these years. This was a really great social studies lessons that my students really enjoyed, and it really helped to teach them more about Derek Jeter.